Yeah, can you share that?
Hey, so it's 1800 Zulu time on Sunday, May 12th, 2024. This is the Solar Chat Zoom meeting for May. It has been an absolutely incredible week for solar astronomy and astronomy in general. I would probably estimate at least 100 million people stared at the same things in the sky that we did this past weekend with the unprecedented Northern Lights display we had. And we are very excited about that. So all of my friends are here, all 12 of them, and I think most of them are my friends. But this is our Solar Chat Zoom meeting. There's Rob Lane. All right, good. So we're gonna have a special presentation this week from Stuart Green, and I'll let Alexandra talk a little bit about him. Did anybody want to say anything before we get going with our presentation? All right, I need more praise. You should have all praised me at that point. That was the time. So here we go. Alexandra, would you take over and introduce our speaker? And let's have a good meeting.
Okay, so Stuart has kindly agreed to give us a short demonstration and tutorial on solar image processing, which I heard that he gave to the BAA solar group. And I heard so many fantastic reviews about it that it was like, ah, great, we've got to get him to come and speak to us as well. So I'll hand it over to Stuart now. Hopefully you can share your screen.
Yeah, should be able to. Uh, Golly, where are we? I think that's the one. Just put that up. There we go. Presume you can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, it's teed up as a presentation, but we're all solar chatters, so let's do a bit of chatting. Let's use the slides as a prompt, really, to open up discussions because we'll all do things slightly differently. There's no one way or right way. We all have different equipment and different software, and we use it in all of that in different ways. So I'm going to go through a few things that I do. But as I say, I'd like to open it up a bit and have a bit of discussion as well, because people have other ideas and other ways of doing things, and it's great to share, and that's what it's all about, really. So just to get into it, I'm going to be talking about across the spectrum, calcium K, G band, 430 nanometers, and hydrogen alpha. Um, I mean, other people are doing other wavelengths, but I think these are the three main ones, or white light, if you like, for broad spectrum imaging. So it's probably worth concentrating on these and see where that takes us. So for those not familiar, I'm sure everybody is on the call, but other people may be looking at this as a recording who may not be completely familiar. So when we talk about white light, broadband, or G band, we're talking about imaging the photosphere. So features that appear on the photosphere, sunspots, penumbra, facula, granulation, features like that are visible and prominent in white light and G band. Then if we get into calcium, K line, and hydrogen alpha, particularly hydrogen alpha, we're looking at the chromosphere, where we can see things like prominences, solar flares, other filaments, and so on. So we're all familiar with these types of features. Here's a solar prominence. Hydrogen alpha full disk. This is in hydrogen alpha, so this prominence would be on the edge of the disks. These are little prominences here. This is G band, or white light, if you like, where you can see umbra and the penumbra, and granulation in the background. And similarly, this is an image in calcium K of the same sorts of features, but you see in calcium K something slightly different. This white area, which is the plage, created by magnetic effects within the lower chromosphere. So you can basically divide the factors that impact image type and quality into three key elements, if you like. So telescope characteristics, the lens quality, you really need a decent scope. Don't get a cheap scope with a bad lens, otherwise you're not really going to get very far. The aperture, focal length, the type of filter, whether it's as I say, hydrogen alpha, calcium K, G band, or broad spectrum white light. Then we've got the camera sensor in particular, and its characteristics. And I've listed a few here: the sensor size, pixel size, number of pixels, frame rate, and shutter type, whether it's rolling shutter or global shutter. And then the third factor, if you like, is the atmosphere. So we're now talking about the clarity of the atmosphere, whether it's hazy, slightly cloudy, or brilliant blue, clear sky, and stability, otherwise known as the seeing conditions. And then the output, if you get all of that right, you hit that sweet spot in the middle there. High resolution images, good sharpness, brightness, and contrast. So I'll refer to this a few times during the talk, really just sort of trying to bring together, the importance of these different characteristics and how they do need to be worked together, as it were, to produce the final image that we'd all be satisfied with. So imaging steps, we've got imaging at the scope and post-processing. So at the scope, of course, we've got you've got to target the sun, obviously, and then focus. And focusing is really critical. I don't know how others do it, but I tend to zoom in, use the F function keys on the computer, zoom in digitally, as it were, and then find focus. And then obviously, if you've got a tunable filter, you've got to make sure that's tuned properly. You see quite a number of hydrogen alpha in particular images that are just slightly off band. So it's really important to understand how to tune it, when it's bang on tune, in order to get the best images. And then there's image acquisition. So that's usually a few seconds of an AVI or an SER file using a machine vision camera. So we'll talk about the cameras shortly. So that's at the scope, and then post-processing. It really involves image stacking. So you take the video and use stacking software to select the best images and create one overall best image, if you like, from that stack. Then there's image enhancement, which is deconvolution and sharpening. So we'll talk about software to do that. And then what I've called image refinement, which really is, it could be a little bit more sharpening using different software, adding color, or otherwise just refining the image to produce an overall final image. So this is where I'm going to sort of take a break and just ask, does anybody do anything differently? Does anybody have a comment on this? Is there anything of that anybody would like to bring up in particular? And if not, I'll carry on. Okay. Okay, so matching camera and telescope. So the main telescope characteristics are aperture and focal length. I mean, we know there's the quality and how good the telescope is generally, but if we just think about the aperture and focal length as two main characteristics, and then the camera pixel size, which affects critical sampling, which I'll get onto, and then the other characteristic is the sensor size. And you would choose an appropriate telescope and an appropriate camera combination, depending on the type of image that you're trying to create. So whether it's a full disk image, or whether you want really one of those close views, really detailed image of all the fine features that you can see in, for example, hydrogen alpha. So a quick note about resolution. I've drawn this, it's a little bit cartoonish, somebody looking at the sun. They do have safety specs on, just so you know. So by resolution, we're talking about the angle really between the angle between resolvable features subtended from in reality the telescope to the object. So what does that really mean? Well, if we look at this cartoon view of the sun, it's got a nice big sunspot. The angle between the two sides of the sun is around about half a degree, in round numbers, 30 arc minutes or 1,800 arc seconds. If we consider a feature on for example, a sunspot, that might be 1,000 arc seconds. The human eye limit is around about 28 arc seconds. So you'd be able to see the sunspot. But if you really want to see fine detail, then you've got to really be down to 1 to 3 arc seconds to start properly resolving the features of interest. And more formally, it's about diffraction limits on scopes according to the Rayleigh criterion. So if we think of a small scope, a scope with a small objective lens, then you get a series of diffraction rings. It's a little bit like a single slit experiment where you get the diffraction pattern through a single slit. But imagine that now in a circular format, i.e. like the objective of the telescope. So you see these ring features with the maximum in the middle and then minima, another maximum at the minima, and decreasing as you move away from that central peak. As you increase the objective diameter, so these features decrease in size. In other words, you're starting to get more resolution. And the limit of resolution, as defined by Rayleigh, is when they overlap, and basically the maximum are just touching, or more formally, when this maximum is overlapping the first minimum of the feature just next to it. So if you look at D, that's a resolvable image, just about. E, where they're overlapping, that's a non-resolvable image according to the Rayleigh criterion. And the formula for that is approximately 1.22 lambda over so that's the wavelength over the diameter of the objective. So in other words, there's a relationship between the wavelength and the diameter of the scope, and that looks like this. So now I've plotted resolution in arc seconds. The formula actually gives a result in radians. So you've got to convert radians to arc seconds, but that's easily done. But you can see the effect of an increasing aperture, where as you increase the aperture, so the resolution improves. Resolution is better down this way than that way. But also as you change the wavelength, so if you're imaging in hydrogen alpha, for example, with a scope of 50 millimeters, an aperture of 50 millimeters, then you could expect, under ideal perfect conditions with perfect optics, to achieve a resolution of around about 3.5-ish arc seconds. So going back to this, that angle, if you like, would be 3.5 arc seconds. If you use the same diameter scope, a 50mm scope, but then changed over from hydrogen alpha to calcium K, for example, you get much improved resolution down to around about 2 arc seconds, according to this. So, if you want maximum resolution, you go to bigger scopes, and that's why we all get aperture fever and start to look at 200, 250mm scopes in order to try to achieve much better resolution. But there is a downside, of course, and the downside is we don't have perfect optics and we don't have perfect seeing conditions, so there's always a limitation. This time we've got aperture on this axis and the seeing conditions. Now I've just made up very good seeing between 0.5 and 1.5. You could argue, well, should that be further to the left or further to the right? Same with the others. But if we use this arbitrary splitting up, if you like, of the seeing conditions, then let's see. If we take where's my cursor gone? Cursor there. If we take a scope at 100mm diameter, then under average seeing, we should be able to resolve a little better than 1.5 arc seconds. If you use the same diameter scope, so 100mm, but in calcium now, you need much better seeing. So you can't use the same diameter scope in hydrogen alpha as you do in calcium K and expect to get the same results under average seeing. You need much better seeing at the shorter wavelengths. So that really starts to limit the diameter of scope that's really useful, because more often than not, we're working within average to poor seeing, and certainly I am. And you need very good seeing in order to get the benefit of these larger scopes. Any questions, any comments about that? Anybody want to raise anything? No? Okay. So image scale versus focal length. So we've mentioned now the objective diameter and the importance of choosing the right diameter for the seeing conditions. If we talk now about the focal length, but this relates also to the camera, because what I've drawn here is a sensor, supposed to be a sensor, the same size sensor, but increasing focal length. So the projected solar disk may fit on the sensor, depending on the relationship between the focal length and the size of the sensor. Or if you increase the focal length, that disk may then overlap the edge of the sensor, and you may then need to create a mosaic. And if you increase the focal length even further, then you may need a multi-pane mosaic. And generally, if you take the focal length of a scope and divide by 100, you get more or less the diameter of the solar disk as projected on the sensor. So that gives you an idea, depending on the scope that you're using and the focal length of the scope. That includes, any Barlows and so forth. It gives you an idea of the size of sensor that you need if you're going to try and get a full disk on that sensor. So again, you've got to match the aperture of the scope with the seeing conditions, the wavelength of light, and the focal length and the size of the sensor. All of these things have to come together for you to achieve what it is you're trying to achieve in terms of imaging. So if you're not really sure about any of this, you can use a field of view calculator. There's a useful one on astronomy tools. And so long as you put it in imaging mode and choose the sun and put in your camera details, so pixel size, pixel array, the pixel size, some scope details, and so on, whether you've got a Barlow or not. You can then create a series of frames, if you like, on a background image, and these will show you the field of view that you would expect with that particular setup. So I've done this for my camera, which is the Basler with a IMX 250 sensor. So 5 megapixels, 3.45 micron pixels. And what that tells me is for 2.5 times Barlow, I'd need to create a mosaic. I won't fit the whole disc on when I'm using this particular camera, this particular telescope with a five times or 2.5 times Barlow or whatever. That's the 2.5 times. Which gets us into sampling and the idea of critical sampling. I assume everybody's familiar, but maybe not everybody understands what it means when it comes to critical sampling. So I've tried to explain that here. So this is an image of the chromosphere in hydrogen alpha, and with the right camera, with the right pixel size for this image scale, then you capture the details. But if you use a camera with pixels that are too large, then you get undersampling. Okay, so the camera is unable to capture the detail, even though the telescope's delivering that amount of detail, because it can resolve that detail. The camera can't resolve it, and therefore you lose valuable image data. So Marty Wise sent out a spreadsheet a little while ago. I've just modified it slightly at the bottom end, but basically, if you haven't got one of these, you need to get one. We can put it up again on Solarchat, but in this case, it's hydrogen alpha, so 656 nanometers on a 60 millimeter scope, my Lunt 60, with the camera that I've just mentioned with 3.45 micron pixels and a native focal length of 500 millimeters. But this calculates the critical sampling focal ratio for a camera with 3.45 micron pixels. So I should be at 12, well, nearly 13. So that's an effective focal length of 776 millimeters. And it tells me that the critical Barlow would be 1.6. So if I put a 1.6 Barlow on with that camera, that would be at the critical sampling, effectively critical sampling. What I actually use is a 2.5 Barlow. So I'm oversampling, but I'm happy with that. I'm not undersampling, which means that the effective focal length is 1,250 millimeters and a focal ratio of 21. So 1,250 millimeters, divide that by 100, it's 12.5 millimeters. So the solar disk projected onto my sensor would be 12.5 millimeters in diameter, but my sensor is only roughly 8 millimeters. So I can't fit the whole disc on. So if I'm taking full disc images with my Lunt 60, I need to do mosaics. It's just as simple as that. If I had a larger sensor, I'd fit it on, but I don't. So basically, I've calculated all these parameters for the different scopes. I've got my 150 and my paperweight. Sorry, my 250. Alexandri gets the joke. And then in blue lights, I do exactly the same. I won't go through it all in detail, but you can see. So I'm either optimally sampled or slightly oversampled. And I always try to make sure that that's the case with every permutation that I might use. So I'm constantly looking at the seeing conditions, what type of image I want to take, match the camera to the scope, match the focal length, make sure I'm not undersampling with that particular camera, go through all of that. So I have a cheat sheet that I use every time I go out imaging, and obviously you get used to it over time. Similar with calcium K, again, I won't go through it in any detail, but every permutation within reason I put on here, and then I know where I am with things. And I can't really overstate it, how important it is to make sure you are either slightly oversampling or optimally sampling. Don't undersample. And I've seen many images that are grossly undersampled. So this is a really useful exercise. So we talked about the telescope characteristics and the camera and sensor characteristics within reason. Not to the nth degree, but you understand the principles. And so the final factor, if you like, the third leg of the stool is the atmospheric characteristics. Snaffled this from Pedro. So these are some SSM data, so solar scintillation monitor data that he's collected. And you can see, if I can find my mouse there, it's bouncing around all over the place, and everybody will experience the same. If you've got an SSM, you'll see the same sort of thing. So what we're trying to do is capture images during these periods of really quite good seeing, and try to ignore the images where the seeing is less good. If you're really fortunate like Christian, he goes to the tops of the French Alps, to these wonderful observatories, this one in particular, and you can see his seeing is to die for, 0.5 arc seconds. I mean, that's just unbelievable. And that's why Christian can produce these wonderful images. If you're not familiar, you go and check it out on Solarchat. I mean, they're absolutely stunning. And it's obviously down to his equipment. He's got all this, everything balanced properly. He's using high quality filters and high quality scopes and all the rest of it, but also he's got this great seeing, which really does make a difference. So if you're not familiar with atmospheric seeing, this is an example. It's not particularly bad, but it's not great. You can see all the wobbling going on. Hopefully that's coming through okay on the Zoom call. Okay. So what we're trying to do is capture images when the seeing is good. This is on a loop, obviously. It's not a continuous video, as it were. It's looping, as you can see, but it's jumping. But it just gives you an idea of seeing. So we want to capture these images when the seeing is at its best. So we call that lucky imaging. I can't think why, but lucky imaging it is. So here we take an AVI or SCR file, little video file, using the machine vision camera, which we've matched to the scope under the conditions that we're trying to image under. And then we go through a process of image stacking and then further enhancement. So image stacking, we use, I use AutoStack at 3. Is anybody using AutoStack at 4 at all?
Yeah, I'm using it.
How do you find it, Sean? Is it very different to 3? Or
yeah, there's some features that make it a little bit different for just the process. I can't say if one is significantly better than the 4 is better than 3 for output wise, but it's a little bit different. I'm trying to get used to all the buttons and controls where they are, and I think I just suffer from trying to quickly take my telescope out just to get some data. So it's worth upgrading and trying. You can run them side by side.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't switched over to 4. Everybody's probably had the same thing where you just get used to running your software, you know how it works and which buttons to press, and then you put something else on, and then suddenly things are slightly different, and it takes a bit of learning again, or it doesn't run the same. I regret upgrading to Windows 11 because things aren't working the same as under Windows 10. But anyway, okay, so image stacking. This is what I do. I presume everybody's similar. Surface, cropped, local for alignment points. I always process in 8-bit. I don't bother with 12-bit, and that seems perfectly fine. And I generally stack 2% and 5%. I pretty much keep that as is. I don't tend to change that very much. Sometimes I'll stack 10%, but
how many frames are you starting with?
Sorry?
How many, if you're doing 2 and 5%, what's your starting frame? So you're doing 1,000, 2,000?
Yeah, around about 3,500 frames. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I haven't spoken about the actual image capture because we all use different software, file capture, or I mean, I use Genic Astra, and there are others out there, and I think it would just maybe be too confusing if I just show mine and everybody's like, what, where's Gamma, what? So we can all capture images. I think the main thing is about the further processing. So we've got the stacking, and then we'll get onto deconvolution and sharpening. But this is what I do. I usually capture, for close views, it's around about 3.5, 4,000 frames. For full disk mosaics, it's probably more like 300, 400 frames for each pane. Okay, so we open a file, we let it choose a point, or we tell it where to stick a point, a reference point for the stabilization anchor. We run the analysis, and this is where a lot of people just ignore the chart. And I don't know who on the call uses it. But just to explain its importance, where has my cursor gone? My key keeps disappearing. So these lines are 25%, 50%, 75%, 100%, and it's quality, the quality of the image. Now, I'm not quite sure what quality means in this context. I saw a video where it was sort of explained, but wasn't totally satisfactory. But anyway, if we take it as is, quality means something, then what I do is I look along this line, which is a 75% line, look where it crosses this green line, which shows you basically how the quality runs through the video file. And where they cross, I click on there, and then on the next, the frame that is side by side, I look at this point here. So quality is 75%. That's where I would have clicked. And it's telling me that the top 5.3% are better than that 75% quality. So the best images are in that top 5.3% of the images captured. So I say I'm stacking 2% and 5%. So I know I'm capturing, I'm stacking the best images out of that collection of images in that SER file. Hopefully that makes sense.
So
yeah, cool.
So when you click that vertical line there at the 75% crossing, does that mean that it's stacking the 2 to 5% above that line, or the 2 to 5% of the 3,000 frames that you've captured? That's what I don't ever understand about that line.
Right. Okay. So it's saying that the stacking software is always going to try and stack the best frames. Starts with the very best, and the next, the next, the next, the next. So let's imagine you stack 100%. Well, you're going to take every single image, every single frame is going to be stacked. So you're going to have your good ones and your less good ones, bad ones, whatever, all stacked into this final image. Well, you don't want that, because you want to ignore those that are not of sufficient quality, and only stack those that are of a quality that you've predetermined. And that predetermined, the cutoff point for me is that 75%. So I just want to stack the best. So it's taking the best 2% of the whole lot and the best 5% of the whole lot. And I know that 2% and 5% should contain only those that are better than a 75% quality. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Thank you.
That's my understanding of it. If anybody else has got any ideas on that, I'm happy to listen. So I always set the AP size to 48 pixels. If you go 24 or whatever, then you get a massive amount of little alignment points, and anything above that you get maybe too few. I don't know, other people might have different ideas, but when I set it to 48, I mean this is the this is the array of alignment points on that image. I think that's probably enough. The more alignment points you have, then the longer it's going to take to stack. So I just leave it at 48 anyway. So the output from AutoStacker is something like that in this case. And then we've got to do something else, some further processing in order to smarten up the image a bit. So this is now dealt with the seeing conditions. I showed you the seeing before, where everything's all wobbly. Now we've taken the best 2% and 5% of all the images and stacked them. I think this is the 2% image. So the next step, I use IMPPG. I'm assuming others do the same, but if you don't, it's a really good piece of software. I don't know if Philip's on the call, but he's produced a really nice piece of software here that does a great job of deconvoluting and sharpening the image. So you can see outside the box here is the stacked image, and this is the deconvoluted and sharpened image. So you can see the process settings that I've used in order to do this. It's a little bit dark, but that's just lightened up in further processing, or you can use the this tool here just to change the overall brightness and so on, gamma, etc. I'm a PixInsight user. I know other people use Photoshop and so on, and probably got similar features, but PixInsight's designed for astro imaging. So I invested in that, and I probably use about 1,000th of its capability, but it works and it's fine for me. So that's the AutoStacker output. This is the IMPPG output, and then with a little bit of refinement using multi-scale linear transform in PixInsight, I can just further refine and sharpen up the image. The danger is over sharpening. You can very, very easily ruin an image just by over processing. Excuse me.
Yeah, I've told a million people that, and there's zero sharp edges on the sun.
Yes, exactly.
Yes,
right.
It's always over sharpening when people first start out.
Yeah, exactly. So be gentle on these control. So that's the final image in mono, which we got some quite nice definition on these features. Further refinement might be coloring it in. So, you know, you can use the curves transformation feature in PixInsight or in Photoshop or whatever to add color.
Stuart,
Yep.
I don't have PixInsight. Is there any other program that you're aware of that can do a similar level of image enhancement? I mean, there's wavelets in Registax, and then they have a standalone version of it. That's the only other thing other than the other programs that do Lucy Richardson deconvolution. But that PixInsight looked really good, but it's, from what I've gathered from nighttime imagers, it's expensive and an extremely difficult user interface. So I don't think I'd want to go that way.
Both true, but they do give you the new versions for life when you pay for the initial version. Photoshop, Smart Sharpen, and Unsharp Mask have produced the best solar images on Earth for 2 decades, in my opinion. But again, that's just my opinion. I have PixInsight. I have all of these programs he's talking about. It seems that the better they're stacked, or the more sharpened they look, the worse they look for the sun, in my opinion.
In regards to Photoshop 2024, if you once you have your image in Photoshop, if you select the select Photoshop raw filter, there's effects in there that I think are extremely similar to what's being achieved in PixInsight.
I would agree.
What's the name of it? Because I use a PaintShop Pro. There's probably an equivalent.
It's called a raw filter in Photoshop. It's what you use to start your raw filter.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers, guys. As I said, sorry, Brian, go on.
I was just going to say, there's a piece of software out called DxO. I'm not sure the full name of it. It's exceptionally powerful, especially people doing wildlife photography, birds, and that sort of thing. A buddy of mine uses it exclusively, and it does a pretty good job on deep sky, solar, and that sort of thing too. It has a lot of these Photoshop type filters, and similar to what's in PixInsight. I've just been drawn away from PixInsight due to the learning curve and expense of it. So I've gotten along with Photoshop to fine tune things after MPEG or a few other pieces of software.
Okay, cheers.
In defense of PixInsight, it is $300, but that's nowhere close to the price of Photoshop subscription over so many years, and you do get the new version of it every time for life that it's released. It's harder than hell to use, and I get it out once every 3 months, and I cuss at it for half an hour, and then I put it away for 3 months. So I do get what you're saying, but I don't think there's any better sharpening routine out there than Smart Sharpen in Photoshop or the Camera Raw filter. And Mark Townley developed an iterative unsharp procedure that he published on Solarchat that takes it to the limit for solar imaging. You don't want to go past that limit, man. There's nothing sharp on the sun.
Bob, were you asking about sharpening or post-processing as in the contrast? Because IMPPG is by far the best wavelet for sharpening I've found, and that's freeware, and it's much, much better than Registax wavelets.
Yeah, Registax wavelets is terrible.
Yes.
Sun.
I would, the first thing that I would ever go to is IMPPG. Do your sharpening in that, and then I usually just go straight into Photoshop to change the contrast. But you can do contrast in IMPPG, but I just prefer to use the curves in Photoshop to just very mildly change, the histogram in that. So if you've got Photoshop or what did you say you had, PaintShop or something, it'd be exactly the same, or GIMP. That's freeware as well. I'll give you, access to the curves in the histogram.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I use mostly curves, histogram for my image processing, and I've just used wavelets for so long from Registax. I still use that, and or a deconvolution program. And finally, in the photo application, I use PaintShop Pro because it's way less than Photoshop. A little unsharp masking, and call it good.
You mean way less expense than Photoshop? Is that what you mean?
Yes, yes. What did I say? Yeah.
I was just curious what you meant by way less. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, way less than Photoshop, and it has 99% of the same tools. It appears so. That's what I use.
Okay.
One of the programs I'm using is Affinity Photo now, and Affinity Photo is quite cheap actually. It's I think it's well under around $100 or less, and that's a once only fee, and you get all the upgrades. So Affinity Photo is well worth looking at. And the guy, one of the guys who helped develop it, is an astronomer, and he has now some solar tools that he's put into there. So that's well worth looking at as well.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, so as I said at the start, everybody's got their own way of doing it, their own software. So there's no right and wrong way, I guess, just different ways. Although you can easily screw up an image if you don't do things right with the particular setup that you're using. Okay, so final image model, final image colored by using curves, whether it's in Photoshop or derivatives and so on. One thing, I mean, Stephen mentioned with PixInsight, once you've bought it, you do get upgrades for life and all the rest of it. A recent upgrade or inclusion is the Solar Toolbox. So I've been playing around with the Solar Toolbox in PixInsight, which seems quite okay. I haven't explored it fully yet, but it does have these nice features. You can do you've got a drop down menu here, and you can look at the surface only if you're looking at a close view, or surface and prominences, and you can enhance the prominences, and it seems quite a capable.
It's very good, except that you have to use PixInsight to use it. That's the only
Oh
problem.
yeah, exactly. That's right.
It's got some really good tools. Yeah.
I bought PixInsight when I felt flush, and now I've got it. I'm going to use it. I got it a few years ago, so it's useful that they brought out this Solar Toolbox. So I'm going to play around with that, see how good that is overall. You might see some flashes in a moment. We're right in the middle of a thunderstorm. We've got heavy rain here at the moment.
Yeah, it's about to rain.
All right. So
hey,
I mean,
before you move on from that, Stuart, to add in, when I started doing this 20 years ago or so, I was a real stickler about using the correct colors, the right color. And I calculated out exactly the RGB and the CMYK values for the hydrogen alpha wavelength, and it just looks horrible. There's no way to do that, because when you go from a 3-dimensional to a 2-dimensional surface with that color, it just completely blurs and you can't see anything. But I really tried hard to push that as people using the correct color. And I think it's really interesting that when you go from 3 to 2 dimensions with that particular color, our eyes cannot sense the difference. And it was even worse with calcium. So I just thought I would throw that tidbit in there. And it always ends up orange because, we can see that a lot better. The highest contrast would be green, but I think it's interesting that color, although it's beautiful and absolutely fantastic in the eyepiece of an H alpha telescope, it's impossible to represent in a 2-dimensional surface.
Yeah, I think we've all tried and failed. I know I have. Okay, so I mean, how over time are we okay? Because I'm just going to run through a few examples.
Yeah, I know, guy. You can have all the time you want.
Okay, and just tell me if you've had enough. But I've just got a few examples, which I hope will be helpful. Again, you know, lots of expert images on the call, and you're probably sort of yawning internally, but you know, for new people, sorry, that's a clap of thunder in the background. For new people, it may be of more interest and more use. But anyway, here's a full disk, hydrogen alpha full disk. You can see some nice active regions and filaments and little prominences, philoproms, and so on. So I capture that on a triple stack LUNT 60, and I've got Bob to thank for the little compression idea. I've got the bearings in here, Bob, and I rotate the whole unit. I don't use the thumb screws, and that compresses the Echelon, works perfectly. It's absolutely brilliant. It's transformed the way this scope works, Bob. So can't thank you enough, mate. Thank you. So there's that internal pressure tuner. So I use a Basler ACA 2440 75 camera, 3.45 micron pixels, and a 2.5 power mate. And I create my full discs using a mosaic procedure. So I take 9 very much overlapping panes and stitch them together. I use MSICE, so Microsoft Image, is it compilation? I can't even remember what it is now. I just use ICE. But basically that stitches them all together, makes a nice full disc. The problem can come when you don't have each pane absolutely perfectly tuned right across. You get little dark patches where they do overlap, but just takes a bit of time to get that right. So IMPPG, these are my settings for when I do this particular step in processing. I use 50 iterations. I think, Alexander, you use 500, don't you, when you're doing full discs? Yeah. So for close, what I call high resolution imaging, others might say, well, you can get higher than that, but I use my 150 double stacked. So I've got 2 LUNT 35s on the back of this scope. I have a little lens in here to collimate the beam. It's a 150 f10 I-star optical objective on the front, internally RF. And again, Bob, these 2 little LUNT 35s are tuned using your idea of this little roller bearing, needle bearing. So that works perfectly fine. This is the camera I use with a 2.5 times power mate at f34. So that's giving me that sort of image scale. These are the settings, which on the recording you could take a closer look at. High res at 430 nanometers. So I use a Technosky 125. Sometimes I stop it down depending on the scene conditions. I've got like an 18mm mask that I put on the front just to help me out when the seeing is not particularly good. That's the camera. I use 5.86 micron pixels when it's at the full diameter. And if I'm using 5 times power mate to take that type of image. I think we all know what this is. We've all been imaging it the best we can this past week. But I use a Lacerta wedge. So the first thing I did was stripped out all the safety features, i.e. the neutral density filters and all the rest of it. So I never put my eye to this damn thing because I'd probably do some damage. But I've got a 430 nanometer filter in at this end and an infrared filter at this end. It's obviously not an IR UV filter, just an IR filter, but takes some of the sting out of the beam. Yeah, that works very well. I'm very pleased with that. Image settings, and for calcium, I use the same scope, but with the modified module. Like Mark Townley, I do a lot of tinkering, strip out stuff, I think you do the same, Bob. Strip stuff out. I'm using the yellow filter out of the module, but I'm using a Barlow K-line and one of these Omega filters. I don't think you can get these anymore, but a calcium Omega filter, and everything else is stripped out from the original. So I'll either use that on this little scope, the Alto 72mm. I've masked that down to 43 to give me f10 at the output, feeding into this. And so I can get either full discs, again, as mosaics. If I use a 2.7 Barlow, again, matching the scope to the camera and the conditions, etc., doing all that to get this type of image. Or if I use the bigger scope, the 125 on a 5x Barlow, with that camera with 5.86 micron pixels, I can get this type of image.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
You've got the same calcium K module that I have there. Do you have any problems with a ghost along the limb? I'm having an awful time with mine, and I know Nick has brought it up as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know because I've stripped out everything, so it's not really a lunt calcium K module anymore. It's just a housing with the lunt yellow filter at the back.
Right.
But I do still have some, as you say, like ghosting. It's more a brightening one side of the limb. So, you know, even if you take out the standard mirrored filters from, you know, this bit here and this one here, if you take those out, which I have done in this, you still get that brightening. So it's probably, you know, something in the main barrel of the scope or the main barrel of this. We need some Vanta Black or, you know, some of the other similar black paints that are available.
Both of my lunt calcium K wedges, no matter what you do to them, they always have that same thing.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah, I think we got to the end. So summing up, you know, obviously choose your wavelength depending on what it is you want to look at. You decide on your. Yep.
Let me just ask, you're using the larger aperture at its native f ratio, f7.6?
Sorry,
do you stop that down at all?
This?
7.8?
Yeah, I do. So depending on the conditions, you know, if I'm feeling really lucky, I'll use it at full aperture. When the conditions just aren't up to it, as we know, the scene's very, very variable, I'll stop it down to maybe 80 or 60. You know, just depending on how things look really on the day.
The reason I ask is there are very few telescopes that I've experienced that image very well at calcium K line due to spherochromaticism. So for that to do what it looked like it did at that's a really well corrected calcium K scope.
Yeah,
at that wavelength, especially at that f ratio. So that's very interesting and very good.
Yeah, I'm very, very pleased with it. And on that particular day, I must have had good seeing to feel lucky. Yeah, I'm very pleased with that setup. Seems to work very well. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, so decide on image scale whether you're doing a full disc or close-up view, and you know, again, emphasizing optimize the telescope, the Barlow, the camera arrangement, you know, number of pixels. Make sure you don't undersample. Always work on the work out the critical sampling for your arrangement and you know, optimize. And as we've said, as we all know, capture some AVI or SER, stack, deconvolution and sharpen. I use ion PPG, and I think many others do. Refine, I use PixInsight, and as we've discovered, other people use other software packages as well, which is fine. And then add color, and There you go. Bob's your uncle. Bob.
I'm sorry, what was that, Stuart?
I don't know if it's a saying in the US. Bob's your uncle?
No,
No. Oh, okay. Must be a British thing.
I thought you were talking to me. Sorry.
Yeah.
It pops around in
Good.
Canada.
All right. Sorry, Bill.
I say it pops up in Canada once in a while too. Bob's your uncle.
Yeah, there you go.
Probably
I don't know why. I
migrated
don't know where it
over.
comes from. Yeah, good. So any further comments or questions, or open for discussion, whatever?
I just find auto stacker with the graph and everything very difficult to understand. And I was wondering if there's any site that has the Reader's Digest version of how to optimize using auto stacker between that graph and the percentage or the quality index and what all those mean, and if I should even worry about it or just set those parameters and then the number of alignment points and call it good, because I really haven't found anything that explains it very well.
No. I found a YouTube video with the guy who wrote Auto Stacker. He was being interviewed, and it was, quite an extended video. And he was asked about the quality. And from my recollection, he did talk about it, but I didn't really understand what he was getting to, and I don't think the interviewer did either. But apologies if I've got that wrong. But yeah, it just seems to be some sort of arbitrary thing. I'm not quite sure how quality is measured, to be perfectly honest. But
Is that the 2 hour video with Simon Tang? Is that the one?
Yeah, it's in the Solar reference library if you want to watch it. And it's like an hour and a half or something with Emil going through Auto Stack Up 4, I think, actually.
Oh, right,
Yeah,
okay.
it is. Yeah.
Damien Peach
So
went
can I-
through it with him and said, ignore the graph completely. So work out what you need to use, how much movement you're likely to see. This was for planetary, I know. And then select the number of frames based on noise and movement of planet rather than take any notice of the graph. I haven't tried it on solar, but it seems strange that he says throw that away.
Yeah, yeah.
So as the Mac
So there
user here in the group, I'd like to tell you that there is not a single astronomical program in existence anymore that captures and stacks photographs or images or movies. The only options you have on a Mac are PixInsight, which takes at least 45 minutes to stack a single file, or a program called Linkeos, Lynkeos, which is free and does a pretty decent job at stacking. But our friends Richard Wright, who used to be with Software Bisque, and he's written several astronomical programs that we probably use, like SkyX, and he's a Cody, is working on something called the Sorcerer's Apprentice that he's writing, and I'm the beta tester, that will capture and stack like Astro IIDC used to. In my opinion, Astro IIDC is the best piece of astronomy capture software ever written. But unfortunately, he went out when it went from 32-bit to 64-bit, and Apple required you to pay a fortune to write software to work on their OS. He went out of business. So Mac users, you're still shit out of luck when it comes to astronomy, unless you want to use PixInsight. But Stuart, thank you a lot for the most informative lecture I've ever heard on preparing your equipment for solar imaging. Rob, thank you. Rob Lane, maybe you're the whiz kid who went from a guy I showed solar astronomy to a couple of years ago to now one of the best imagers out there.
Someone that's got no money left.
No money,
what my wife would say.
Maybe we can get you, or even I would do it, but people hear me talk enough, to talk about some of the post-processing tricks that you use to cover up the inherent defects. Like, Alan Friedman and me and another guy who's no longer there kind of developed this whole invert the surface and put it on top of the prominence thing that's used by every newcomer, and they all think they invented it. And that Alan Friedman is just a fantastic artist, man. And a lot of people don't even like that anymore, but that's what everybody does when they take a solar image. You know, you got to invert the disc and slap it on top of the proms. He should really get a lot of credit for that. But there's a lot of tricks that you have to do to make it look like Friedman's images, and I use them all the time. And you know, I don't believe it crosses the line of fakery, not like a fake ISS transit or something like that. But it'd be kind of cool to have somebody take the stacked image and do their various Photoshop or whatever, you know, other software you guys are using, and just show people how to treat them, you know, from monochrome stacked image to finished awesome Stephen Ramsden solar image. And so if somebody wants to do that, that would be great. Does anybody want to share anything about the greatest Northern Light display we've had in my lifetime? You were muted, Bob. Did you have something you wanted to say?
I just said it was an oh my God experience.
It was. It was. And I downplayed it on the internet. I ate a lot of crow over this. I got the naysayer fever on that one, saying, "Oh, that's never going to happen." And here I am down, you know, at 30 degrees latitude, almost in the Caribbean, and I walking around the house Friday night, and I turned around and there's a Northern Lights. Just I was like, "What the hell?" And I got my wife out there, and she couldn't even believe it. She didn't even believe it. She thought it took me a while to convince her that's what it was, because we took a couple 2-second exposures, and it was just obviously Northern Lights, and it went on for hours.
It was off the scale even the next day. So I'm guessing that, did you see it in Australia?
Yeah, I
I never
guess.
saw it in Brisbane.
Well, Andrew Wall down there is at 30 or 30 degrees off the pole, and he was publishing stuff immediately from it. So yeah. And then last night it fizzled out for us in the South US. But you know, today was supposed to be another KP9 and G5 storm, but it's been downgraded now to G4 and maybe a KP7. So plus it's overcast. But I'll tell you, that was a once in a lifetime experience. I know Sean watched them, and you know, it just blew everybody's mind. So we've had a really great week for people paying attention to the sun, and I hope it continues. But you know, it won't. It's all about money in the U.S., so everybody will forget about this in a couple of days.
Well, and unfortunately, the lunar phase is increasing, and it's going to make it harder to see the fainter aurora as the week goes on. So Friday night was like
everything came together, man.
Everything that once in a lifetime, man. All the perfect storm of no moon, great weather, and a KP9 geomagnetic storm was just like, I don't think you could see that in Alaska or even Scandinavia if you would go up there for your typical aurora cruise or whatever.
I don't think they would have seen anything like that. We like I say, we're down on the beach basically in Florida, more or less, and it was all the way south on the south horizon from where we were. It was overhead, north, south, east, and west of us, and it went on for hours. And I called my neighbors, and I just moved here, and they all think I'm nuts anyway with these telescopes. And I said, "Man, you need to go outside and look at the Northern Lights." And he just hung up on me. He didn't even reply. He's like, "Whatever, man." So yeah, it was really.
We've had the Martin and I have probably had the worst weather through that week, all of last week. There was barely any sky, I think Martin will agree with. And it's yeah, so even if where we are in Brisbane, the area that we're in, and I think people even north of us did see it, but we didn't stand a chance.
Brisbane's like 20 degrees, right?
27.
Yeah.
I think you would have
seen
seen
it. Well, we would have if we didn't have the cloud and the rain. It has been cloudy and rainy just about every single day. But a very good friend of mine was just he's on holiday in York, and he rang me up and he said, "This is just unbelievable." And he went down to the York Minster, and he's got an amazing photo of the auroral angel over the York Minster up on Space Weather. And he was telling me there's all these young girls who going, "Oh wow, what do we do? Oh, this is fantastic!" And So he showed them how to use their iPhones to take a photograph, and he sent me a picture of all these young girls laying down on the cobblestones underneath the York Minster, taking these photographs. There's a few of those on the space weather site as well.
Yeah, I think the best images came out of iPhones for this event. They were all over the internet.
Yeah. That's one thing that struck me. The last time I've seen an aurora like this was 20 years ago, or I think around Halloween time.
Right.
And back then, I mean, your phone was your little Nokia or whatever. I don't think really cameras were even on phones very much at that stage. So, and now 20 years later, and just you go on social media, which didn't exist probably 20 years ago either. And
Yeah.
now everyone's out with their iPhone. It's just amazing the
Good old days.
technology. Yeah.
So here, you know, I'll just show you this, and I can't, my jaw was dropped, and I've been doing solar astronomy for a long time, man. But that, that's not even all that great.
The white glow at the bottom, is that aurora or is that sky glow from
That's
somewhere else?
The green from the aurora. There's no cities.
Oh, right.
That's green. Let me show you this picture, and then I'll get done. I know everybody's seen a million of these already, but it was just unbelievable. Am I still being shared? Yeah, I am. All right, here you go. Look at this. Look at this photograph.
Mm.
Yeah.
This is a 2-second exposure
Mm.
with the setting crescent moon down there on the bottom left, and this is the view off our marsh deck at the beach at 30 degrees latitude, man.
Yeah,
amazing.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So how do I stop share? Oops. I'm sorry.
Has there been any report of flare on the northeast limb that's out of our line of sight by any of the space observatories, like satellite shots?
I haven't seen any, and I've been keeping up with it pretty closely this week.
If I can share here for a minute, I'm stacking images here, but this, if you guys see in a full desk here.
No.
Do it one more time. I had to make you a host first. Okay, there you go.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So and this needs to be restacked because it's a really shitty image to start with. But this was like the proms today were just mind-boggling. But this big loop here on the northeast, I figured there must be something hot coming around the limb since the current hot spot's starting to depart. So anyway, that was just
that was on SDO also. I put a post up on Facebook with the same photo.
Okay.
So those look like post-flare coronal loops. So
yeah. I could see spikes in that area, but I need to have a look a bit closer. I didn't know there was loops.
There was something going on here with this new active region too, and anyway, I had absolutely terrible conditions this morning with cloud drifting through, so they didn't stack very well. I'll have to go back through and redo them when I have some spare time.
I need to look at mine a bit more closely.
Alexandra, you're asking about magnetometer data?
Oh yeah, can we see that?
Yeah, Steve.
Because usually I remember your maximum being about 20. What did it get up to?
Well, it's funny, it didn't exceed 15-ish, but
really?
But it's the rate of change. So you can get a big deflection, but if it's more, a slower event, then the rate of change is less, if you see what I mean. Let me show you. So that's that's the whole event. So the 10th, 11th, and 12th. So midnight on the 10th. What time were you out, Alexandra?
About 11.
Yeah.
It seemed to be absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah. So that was about there. Where are we? So if I go to this one, so this is my high resolution version. So this is every 1 second I'm taking a sample. So the CME impacts occurred there. Again, that's the 10th, the 11th. So
it's not changed, I don't think. Is it?
Sorry?
It's still the same graph, isn't it?
All right. So how do I? I've changed the graph on my screen. It says your screen
Stop share and
sharing.
reshare.
Has it not changed?
No.
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 So if you stop your share and then reshare the new graph, it'll work.
Yeah, okay. Stop share. Reshare that one. Okay. You see that one?
Oh, that's better.
Okay. So the CME impact was there. You can see that very sharp transition. And then, so around about 11 o'clock-ish.
Yeah, that's the fantastic show.
Yeah.
Hey, so
Looks like it was amazing at 3 when I was asleep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, I was asleep about here.
Oh, Stuart.
No. Yeah. Oh, well.
all right.
It is what it is. My magnetometer works for me.
That's cool, man. So
Yeah.
look at and to end it or whatever. These two images I took while we were doing your presentation, and they're both 1,000 frames with the Apollo M Max.
Okay.
And I wanted to point out, when I was in Australia for 6 weeks imaging with some high-end scopes and going all these different schools all over the country, I noticed immediately that A, I was going to be fried by the sun, and B, one image looked better than any number of stacked images, regardless of how many you stacked. The single image looked a million times better always. And I live in pretty clear skies down here right now. So can anybody tell what image they think is stacked and which one is a single? Are you seeing these images?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stacked on
trying to look
the
close.
right.
Yeah,
I
the
said
one on the right is
the left.
the one on the right is stacked and it's more blurry. The one on the left looks far better, and that's just one ping. You know, on a Mac you can't take videos and stack them. You have to take single images and then stack them all. So if you've got extraordinarily good seeing conditions, you don't even have to do any of that, because the only purpose you stack is to reduce the noise in your image. So if you don't have any noise, you're wasting your time stacking to begin with. Just thought I'd point that out. Anybody else?
Hey,
Yes.
I don't know if I can share my screen, but I wanted to go back to imaging a little bit. And
Okay.
I think for some reason I've had halfway decent success at conveying the actual H alpha image of the sun to people who, you know, in fact, they've asked, you know, what does the sun look like when you look through the telescope? And I try to tell them it doesn't usually look anything like what you've seen pictures of, negative disk images or the kind of goldish yellowish images. So I just wanted to share this maybe and see what you guys think. I don't think it's as good as the grayscale, but I do think it's a pretty good representation of the sun. So I'd share that with you if you want to see it.
Yeah, share it. Let's see.
Okay, so how do I share it with you? I'm a Luddite when it comes to all of this.
The green button on the bottom of your screen that says.
Oh, I got it. Okay, I see it. So just click on that.
Then you choose what screen you want to share out of the options.
Okay.
Getting a little bit of the Australian sun here today.
Okay.
There you go.
Can you see the grayscale image there?
You didn't. I don't think you chose a screen to share, did you?
Just choose the default one that it gets. Yeah, because that's
okay. Now,
yeah.
Wow.
Is it there now?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the grayscale image.
A lot of sharpening on that.
And there's the simulated H alpha view. So not as good, but I think it sort of conveys a more realistic for people who want to say, what color is the sun? And I say, or how many colors are the sun? Or I just say, there's no colors. It's just one color. It's a monochromatic red color. So if they want to see it, this is the image I usually say. This is a more realistic presentation for what it's worth.
I do usually find though that the bright plage looks orange to me when I look down the telescope. The sort of like the quiet sun looks that red, but then the plage looks orange to me. Am I the only person that thinks that?
Well, I see white in the
Really?
active regions in my H alpha scope. And the plage in calcium K is definitely white. So yeah,
Oh yeah, no, I'm talking about
I do not
hydrogen
see
alpha.
pink. You know, it's not right on the edge of the visible wavelengths for our eyes, and I think that it's a lot of variation in individuals, you know. And I think that's part of the problem. And that's about as close as you can get, Bob, to having the right color. But you know, it's yeah. You're not going to get as many likes with that as you do with the reverted orange, you know, and you got to either twerk with your image or, you know, you got to get your social media likes, man, you know.
Yeah, I know. I just generally prefer the grayscale and
I would love to be able to show exactly what it looks like in the telescope because it looks better in the eyepiece than any of these images any of us put out. It looks a million times better. But getting that across to people is impossible. So.
Well, the main thing I think imaging does is it takes those fleeting moments of good seeing, which are never covering the entire disk or even the area you're looking at, and it freezes them. So you get this perception that the image is more detailed than what you can see with your eye, but that's not really the case.
No.
Your imaging can't create detail that wasn't there to begin with. So training your eye to see those fleeting moments of good detail and everything, I think that's the key for observing anyway.
All right, so we're at the end of the time here. This is the longest solar chat we've ever had, but love you guys for showing up, and I'm really grateful. The shed behind me, by the way, I had it in the field of view because that's where the 6-foot snake has been for the last 2 days, and my job is to go get him out now. And it's a yellow rat snake who's been shedding in there. So last 2 weeks ago, it was wrestling the alligator out of the pond, which went successfully. And now I'm going to get a 6-foot rat snake, and luckily they're not venomous, so he probably won't even bother me. But I do appreciate everybody showing up, and thank you for supporting our nonprofit in the last fundraiser. We did a great job with that, and we'll be going to Kosovo right after next month's Solar Chat meeting. And you all are responsible for that. All of you people here made this happen, and we are by far the biggest donors to that whole project in Kosovo. We're going to let Celestron and other people take credit for it, but we did more than anybody. So thanks for attending the Solar Chat meeting, and we will see you all next month. Adios.
See ya.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Stuart.
Stuart.